welcome to or welcome back to my channel, and thank you very much for joining me here again today. Also, we do have our lights on in the background for now, but load shedding is not our friend and she will be knocking on the door pretty soon. But today we're going to talk about a case that is absolutely wild and something that you really only hear about in movies. It was also another suggested case, so thank you very much for all your suggestions. I really do appreciate them. But this case involves everything. It involves betrayal, sex, lies, infidelity, and ultimately murder. But let's not reveal too much and let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
Today we are heading out to Johannesburg, South Africa, where the bloody trail of a murder frenzy that sadly claimed 7 lives ended on a riverbank with a man sitting in his car and shots ringing out. So, let's not even mess around and let's talk about what happened. Paul Johannes Meyer, who was 35 years old at the time, and Adriana Christina Meyer, who was 34 years old at the time, were a married couple who were by all accounts very happy. Or at least according to Adriana, they were very happy. Adriana and Paul had 2 children together, and the first daughter was 9 years old and the youngest child was 4. So let's keep those ages in mind for later. So according to Adriana and her friends, before the incident took place, Paul was an incredibly hardworking man. He absolutely loved his family and she thought that he really loved her. But according to Adriana and friends, Paul was such a hard worker because he was always at work. Paul was described as a heavy-set, taller man with really short blonde hair. Paul Meyer was hiding a very dark secret that would come out pretty soon. And sadly, because of Paul's actions and what he decided to do, his lies would turn into tragedy. It was said that the last days before the incident, Paul may have been torn between 2 women and seemingly tortured in his mind for the last couple days of his life. And the reason you may be asking that Paul was so tormented between 2 women was yes, because he had 2 women. He was married to Adriana with 2 children who had been married to for quite a while. And then on the other side, he had a fiancée, Cindy, who was 21 years old at the time and pregnant with his child. And here he ran completely 2 separate lives. And I mean fully separate lives. He had a full fiancé, a full wife, only a couple of towns over from each other. So like we said, Paul was a very hard worker apparently. And according to Adriana, Paul would go to work for long hours during the day and then come home to his wife and children, Adriana, in the evening after work. And then early hours in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the morning, he would then leave again. But he wasn't leaving to work. He was leaving at 4 o'clock and leaving late evenings to go to Cindy's house. So he would be at Cindy's house for longer than he was at home with his wife and kids. But you may have guessed it, that Paul actually didn't have a job. But he was an incredibly big spender. But he would spend Adriana and Cindy's money. And he would basically spend it on each of the women. So he would spend some of Cindy's money on Adriana, and then he would spend his wife's money on Cindy. There were also rumors flying around on the internet via these websites that Paul apparently committed fraud at one of his previous jobs. And that's why he was able to have this little kitty of money as well, that he wasn't constantly taking from his wife and his fiancé, that he actually had a little bit of money by himself.
And we therefore need to redefine the way, I'm sorry about that.
Also, sorry for that, we're clearly just going to have to handle it in the dark for now. But the rumors about Paul committing fraud at his previous jobs were not confirmed. It is just something that was said on the internet. And actually, no one believed that Paul would ever commit fraud because he was apparently a very sweet guy. He was very loving and he was very attentive to his wife, according to the people who knew his wife. But when this case would later come out and when we talk about things later on, police really felt like this was a complete mind boggle. They really couldn't put the pieces together because it just didn't make sense. And sadly, the families involved in this case would never get the answers that they really need and want. But let's actually get into that. But then, in the late evening of Wednesday, the 2nd of June 2004, Paul was at Cindy's house ready to talk to Cindy. In the house at the time with Cindy was her friend, Roseanne Lamb, her mom, Linda van Rooyen, and a family friend who was staying at the house at the time, Rudolf Niemann. So Cindy and the 3 people in the home, as well as Paul, were all chatting until apparently an altercation occurred. Paul then said to the domestic worker who was there at the time to go and run an errand and not to come back for a while. So the domestic worker didn't return for at least an hour, and now this altercation is still continuing between Paul and Cindy, and it's getting more heated, and it is kind of awkward because there are other people in the house. And the argument then eventually got so heated that Paul had clearly had enough. He then went to his bag, he pulled out a pistol, and he then shot everybody in the house, including Cindy, who was 21 and pregnant with his unborn child. So now that everybody has been murdered, Paul then leaves everybody in the house, and he then heads home to his wife Adriana and his 2 children. He then goes home and he's all excited and he's like, oh cool, let's go on a holiday, let's go and stay in a hotel. And Adriana's just a bit taken aback. It's the middle of the week and he now wants to go on holiday, and she's like, what about your work, what about my work? And he's like, no, don't worry about it, let's just go on holiday, let's just relax. So Adriana, like I said, is taken aback. She finds it's very weird, but she does what her husband says, and she gets all excited with her kids, packs the bags, and they then head off to the Robertsham Hotel. Then, on Thursday morning, with his wife sleeping next to him, Paul then rolled over. He then dug into the bag next to his bed. He pulled out a small revolver and then turned to his wife and shot her in the head. He then walked to the next room where his children were fast asleep and did exactly the same thing, one by one. Now remember, I said that Paul originally, when he first murdered Cindy and that entire home, he sent the domestic worker out for an errand. And when she came back, she came home to a house full of dead people. And she was absolutely taken aback. Obviously, she was going to report this to the police. And Paul was the last person in the house and clearly isn't in the house. So police then come there. They see that everyone has been murdered in exactly the same way, with gunshot wounds to the head. And then while police were busy working on this case, they then get a call the next morning that only a couple of kilometers away in a hotel have more people been murdered in the exact same way. So police were now linking Paul obviously to the murder of his family and his extended family, technically, with his fiancée and his unborn child and the 3 other people in the house. And in the Robertsham Hotel, the administrators and the cleaning staff who were there to clean for the morning found the body sadly late that morning, but Paul was nowhere to be found and long gone. Police then said that after the morning complete slaughter of all of these families, Paul was on the run. And obviously, Paul Meyer was the chief suspect in these cases. But when police were on the lookout for him, they said to people who were trying to look for him as well that they should really be alert and really try not to approach him because he is obviously armed and dangerous. He was believed to be carrying a .357 Magnum, a pistol, and an automatic rifle at the time. But apparently, after Paul had murdered Cindy and the other people inside the house, he actually took the car belonging to Rudolf Niemann, and that is the same car that he would later be found in. So the search for the alleged killer ended a couple days later in the area of Kronstadt in the Free State. Captain Rosa Bernard, spokesperson for the SAPS in the Free State, said that Paul Meyer was spotted by a member of the public at 11:15 on Friday morning. She said that Meyer was parked on the northern side of the river, and she said, quote, "Our members tracked him down and found him parked near the river. They wrestled him and they were able to get the gun away, but sadly, he got it back again, rammed it in the back of his mouth, and pulled the trigger," end quote. Paul was actually pulled out of the car and taken to hospital, but he was clearly dead on arrival. And serial killer expert Superintendent Pete Bielefeld said that police did not know what sparked the killings at all, because Paul had no history of violence other than the odd outburst like a normal people have, and especially not towards his family. Police were looking into maybe Paul had been using drugs, maybe he was under the influence of some type, but there was really no rhyme or reason why he would do this at all. Police also thought that maybe because he had been recently fired from 2 companies in Joburg, maybe the stress had just gotten to him, but really would he then kill 4 people and then his family as well? Paul's brother-in-law, Jacques Milan, described Paul as being a big, strong man with a kind heart who loved his family and kids, but sadly got involved with the wrong crowd, which then turned him into a maniac, end quote. So was he taking drugs? Was he hanging out with people who were influencing his ideas and beliefs? But why would he still do that? Jacques Milan also arranged for the entire family, Paul, Adriana, and the 2 children, to be buried together, and he offered his deepest sympathy to the other families and said that he wanted to remember only good things about the victims. Now, it's not really my opinion to speak about where people should be buried, but I don't know how I feel about putting Paul, who murdered Adriana and the 2 children, in the same plot. I just think it's very bizarre. But let me know what you think of this case down below. It is clearly very uncharacteristic for Paul Meyer to have done what he did. Do you think that he was influenced by drugs, alcohol, people, or do you think that he was planning this for a very long time? Because clearly he must have planned it somehow. He had the guns next to him all the time. He carried them everywhere that he went when he went to murder the different people. So he probably planned it somehow. But what was really driving him to murder? Maybe Cindy was now putting pressure on him to divorce his wife, Adriana. Maybe Adriana now found out about Cindy. We really don't know. But let me know what you think down below. I hope you all have a fantastic week further, and I'll see you next time. Bye.